Good morning, Gary Friedman.
Good morning, Dina Kaplan.
How are you?
Good, good. It's a beautiful spring day. That's why I'm wearing a thick jacket, because it's freezing cold and raining.
Okay.
But welcome to Victoria. That's what the weather's like all year round.
In Australia. Gary lives in Australia with his wife Sharon and his two kids, Idan and Kiki. And he is an animator, a filmmaker, a puppeteer, and an international educator, and a great dad and a good friend. Gary, you did a lot of work in South Africa. You were brought up in South Africa under apartheid, and you did a lot of puppetry work after you studied with Jim Henson in 1987. And you did a series of projects. One of the first ones was Puppets Against Apartheid. You want to tell us about it?
That was one of the earlier ones, Pants and Doody. Yeah, sure. Pants was a city council worker in the sewage department in Cape Town. And Doody was a flower seller on the Grand Parade. And they developed after the British Punch and Judy. And I felt that we needed a voice during this period of apartheid in South Africa. So they started playing and performing on the streets of Cape Town. And it was interesting times, let's say, because that's when I really found my political voice. And when I started getting beaten up for doing political satire on the streets. In the early 1980s, and launched Pants and Doody, Puppets Against Apartheid.
Hey, Punch, come out. Hey, Punch, come out. He's not that side. Maar wacht een beetje, ik ga die andere side kijken. Hey, Punch, come out, you bloody careless. He's nowhere to be seen. Have you seen him? Hey, it's no need to be aggressive. Yeah, it's not aggressive. No? No, it's defensive. Wat beteken jy? Ja, Pee-wee sê we must all be defensive now with the unrest up here. It's not funny. Yeah. Did you hear what happened? Huh? You'll never guess what happened. Kuberg, our very own nuclear power station, has exploded, and all the nuclear fallout has spread around South Africa, turning everybody's skin black so nobody can vote again.
So that was just a little bit of Pants and Doody. But yeah, it was interesting times because I performed all over South Africa, mostly in the streets, and then I took the show on to Europe, and got quite a following for those 7 years when I performed it up to 1987.
And the Puppetry Against AIDS, tell us about that whole series.
Well, Puppets Against AIDS, yeah, that was following when I came back from France, and I wanted to do something which would allow me to take puppetry around Africa. And at the time I was interested in African puppet and mask traditions. So I thought if I could develop something educational, something which people could, a visual theater which people could see and identify with, we could do research and find out the traditions of African puppet and mask theater at the same time as giving over an educational message.
Right.
And so that's how Puppets Against AIDS was chosen at that time as an initial project, because AIDS was becoming something real and a risk.
And rampant. Yeah.
In 1987, it launched in South Africa.
having toured extensively in Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, South Africa, and France, with a major Canadian tour coming up later this year. The African Research and Educational Puppetry Program will not only be appearing for you live today, but will also be performing on video as a tribute to Freddie Mercury. That's at the Wembley Stadium this evening, London, England. Ladies and gentlemen, out of Africa, we proudly present our very own Puppets Against AIDS. Enjoy it!
And so people like Sue, Sue does not have a steady partner. So she always protects herself by using a condom.
Yeah, so Puppets Against AIDS took off. It started off with these huge puppets, and eventually I decided to bring the puppets down to glove puppet size, so we could have more groups traveling around Africa, giving the message across and conducting workshops, both in puppetry and AIDS education at the same time. And it proved really powerful and very successful. And I was involved in that for about 12 years.
And when you started with like the series around voter education, was it at the same time? Was it different? Was it a separate thing?
The voter education stuff, that was in 1994. And it was the time I was leaving Arab to become independent. I'd had enough of running a big organization of 21 people. And and myself went off and did voter education, and then we did puppets in prison. And it was just, time to take off and do my own thing. It was
And how was it received, the voter education puppetry program? Like, how was it?
Well, it was a challenge because we had to come up with a concept where we could reach all 11 language groups in South Africa using puppets. So I thought the best way would be, because puppets have got their own language and they're not limited by one language, so we could do it without language. And I'll show you a clip of that, of how we of what we did. But first, this little puppet is interviewing Nelson Mandela, because Clarence interviewed all the politicians at that time.
Are you going on a journey today?
Yes, I do.
Is it a political journey?
No, it's not a political journey. It's a journey for democracy.
Journey for democracy? Oh, yeah.
So what I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted by myself was, so we had to find a method to use jest, mime, and voice noises, sound effects, to communicate the voting messages to the people. And this was on all the television channels in South Africa at the time, without necessarily using English or Afrikaans or Zulu or Xhosa or any of those languages. We wanted to have it completely open so that everybody could understand. So
Did you feel it had
worked.
an impact? That it had an impact, and you made a contribution?
Yeah, it certainly had an impact, and we got very positive feedback. And then we were invited by the Broadcasting Corporation to do all these political interviews at the same time. And for the first time in my life, I had the freedom to say anything I wanted, to ask anything I wanted to, and no censorship. So I used to go out in the morning and interview all the politicians from all the parties, come back at lunchtime to the Broadcasting Corporation. And together we used to edit and it went out live in the afternoon and evening on all the channels without being watched by anyone. So it was without being censored by anyone, I mean.
Right.
Yeah, so I had complete freedom to do whatever I want for the first and only time in my life.
So do you remember a controversial question you asked then?
Sure. Yeah. Wow. There was the ANC. Oh, there were quite a few, but there was at the time there was the ANC. There was a rumor going around of, I think it was Cyril Ramaphosa went fly fishing with Rolf Meyer, and Rolf Meyer got his fingers caught in Cyril Ramaphosa's hook or fly. So the puppet asked him, what was it like getting your fingers caught, going away with Cyril Ramaphosa and getting your fingers caught in his fly? And Rolf Meyer went red and laughed. It was so funny. But there were lots of things like that. I remember that very clearly. What was so nice is it was very spontaneous, and we could improvise along with the politician, and I could say anything.
All right, Gary. Well, thank you for that. So just tiny tip of the iceberg of what you do and what you've done. And thanks.
It's my pleasure.